Every Soviet citizen dreamed of owning a car that would be a symbol of their country's progress and power. This dream was realized with the Moskvich, a car that shone both at home and abroad. The Moskvich was an athlete that won the toughest competitions, representing everything proud and shameful about the USSR. This vehicle was more than just a car. It was a testament to the engineering and manufacturing prowess of the Soviet Union. The legendary Moskvich inspired a range of emotions from joy and admiration to bitterness and disappointment. Some saw it as a masterpiece, while others saw it as a fake doomed for oblivion. After the war, the winning countries received compensation for the damages caused by Germany. Among the many factories, equipment, and resources received, there was one particularly important plant. The Soviet Union had plans to completely relocate the Opel factory to the USSR. Prior to the war, the factory produced a promising model called the Opel Kadet, which Stalin greatly admired. He believed this car could become the foundation for the creation of a people's vehicle in the Soviet Union. Unfortunately, a problem emerged. During the war, Allied aircraft virtually destroyed the factory. Many machines, tools, and documents were lost or damaged as a result of bombing. There were other factories in devastated Germany that could be considered. For example, one could find the Bio factory, which produced beautiful Bio 321s, or the Tow factory, which manufactured high-quality Tows prior to the conflict. Even the Mercedes plant was on the list, but Stalin preferred Opel, and no one dared to object. Stalin's wishes were law. The order was clear and unequivocal. Everything that remained from the Opel plant had to be transported to the USSR as soon as possible, and car production had to begin at the MSMA plant in Moscow. It didn't matter that there were not enough drawings, documents, or equipment. To solve this issue, German engineers were brought in. Together with Soviet designers, they had to recreate missing drawings, machinery, and documents based on the remaining bodies. German engineers almost completely redesigned the Opel Kadet. Then all the documents and drawings were sent to Moscow, where car production was scheduled to begin a year later using German equipment. The car's name was to be ours, the Soviets' Moskvich. That was the name of the new car for Soviet citizens. Production has begun. The 23-horsepower engine with a lower valve arrangement and independent front suspension was not the most advanced, but it was also not an outdated design. It was an attractive and reliable car with a simple design. Moskvich tried to improve it by developing a wooden van. In the post-war years, relations between the Allies deteriorated and there was a shortage of steel, so steel was mainly used for the defense industry. When Moskvich started producing cars, they were not very popular among the population in the post-war years. However, in the 1950s there was a great demand for them and they became a symbol of the era in the USSR. The cost of the car was 8,000 rubles, equal to 13 average salaries in the Soviet Union at that time. Owning a personal car in the 40s was a sign of status and prestige. Those who could afford it took good care of their cars, treating them like family members, as it was rare to have one at that time. This was the beginning of the complicated yet fascinating history of the Moscow car. Despite the high demand for the car, however, it did not become more modern over time. The design of the car was nearly 20 years old, similar to its predecessor, the Opel Kadet, which was developed in the 1930s. The country needed to create its own model without the help of foreign experts. Unfortunately, the factory lacked experience in building cars from the ground up, and contacting foreign specialists was difficult. Therefore, engineers from the Gorky automobile plant were brought in to help. Due to a lack of experience, models of other foreign cars were purchased in order to familiarize the factory with the process. These included Fiat 1100 Lancia Aurelia Italian cars, Simca Arund, Citroën Ducevi French cars, Hillman Minx Ford Consul, and Jove Javelin English cars. Ford Taunus and Opel Olympia are German cars that were not tested in Soviet conditions, but the engineers studied them to understand which parts and mechanisms would be best suited for use in those conditions. Studying these foreign cars allowed the developers to gain an understanding of the state of the automotive industry at that time. 5 years later, the Moskvich 402 was introduced in the Soviet Union. It was a new model with some parts from older models. The engine, transmission, and rear axle were all adapted from previous Moskvich models. However, the front suspension was updated with double wishbone suspension, which gave the car more stability. A radio and interior heating were added, making the interior more comfortable. Most importantly, turn signals and a heater were included, which had not been present in previous models. There were rumors circulating that the Moskvich 402 had been copied from the Opel Olympia. However, the truth is that among the foreign cars tested, there was an Opel Olympia, and the front suspensions of these two vehicles did have some similarities, and they did look like brothers from different mothers. Despite this, the Moskvich 402 remained a typical representative of its class, as they were all more or less similar in design. Nevertheless, the Moskvich 402 represented a significant improvement compared to its predecessor, as one driver of the time recalled. Compared to the Pobeda, which was known for its slow acceleration, the Moskvich proved to be a more dynamic vehicle. And after driving the Volga GAZ-21, with its wooden steering wheel and braking system, the Moskvich felt like a pleasure to drive. But not everything was perfect. We can say that the Moskvich 402 was the first car designed and produced independently, and the initial production models were of poor quality. In 1988, a scandalous article was published in the famous magazine Zarulim. The journalists of this publication tested the Moskvich 402 under various conditions and, surprisingly, brought down harsh criticism on this vehicle. Despite strict censorship in the Soviet Union, this article was still published. It is likely that after Stalin's death, and during the period known as the Khrushchev thaw, it became more acceptable to openly discuss the shortcomings of Soviet-made cars. During the testing, the Behind the Wheel magazine found several issues. The car struggled to accelerate and experienced jerking. This was due to the carburetor manufactured at the Leningrad factory, which was still in its early stages of development. In the car under test, there is a design flaw with the accelerator pedal. The oil seals on the axles are not holding the lubricant properly, causing oil to leak onto the brakes and potentially leading to dangerous consequences. Additionally, there are issues with the airtightness of the cabin. Dust is getting inside through large gaps in the doors, and the rubber seals are not performing their intended function. During rain, water is entering the cabin through loose, fitting parts, flooding the floor and affecting passengers. Brake adjustments are often necessary. It should be noted that the effectiveness of these vehicles can be affected by ambient temperature conditions, and these are just some of the more obvious issues. Other features such as corrosion on chrome surfaces, persistent trunk cable breaks, frequent windshield wiper failures, and creaking and rattling of the body were previously not considered serious defects, but were rather perceived as childhood illnesses of these cars. The plant has received more than 26 complaints regarding the quality of the products supplied. The plant was obligated to fix all the issues, but many of them kept recurring. This caused dissatisfaction among the chief designer of Mzma, Andronov. He spoke harshly with the owner of the tested car, accusing him of not taking care of the vehicle and not knowing how to operate it properly, which led to its poor condition. However, the same owner later took first place in the USSR championship driving competition in the same vehicle. Andronov may have felt ashamed of his previous statements. Moskvich cars and their modifications were produced for 9 years, despite all the issues. Despite the limited choice, they found buyers among Soviet citizens, as a car was still considered a luxury item in every household. With the Model 402, the factory began to master the art of automotive engineering. Not all aspects worked perfectly right away, but these were the initial steps that provided valuable experience for the engineers. This experience was used to develop the legendary Moskvich model. The design of the new Moskvich was influenced by the fashion trends of the time. Even the appearance of the car reflected the space race between the USSR and the USA. 2-lamp optics, small keeled wings, and a radiator grille. This design was truly innovative and was not inferior to global trends at that time. The transmission, suspension, and bodywork were at the level of international competitors. The only downside was the 50-horsepower engine, which was a modified version of an Opel engine. The car was comfortable with a soft suspension, and everyone who saw it admired its beauty. Those who waited in line for the new Moskvich for 4 years or more were always satisfied with their purchase. There was also a line because more than half of the Moscow residents bought the 408 model. Moskvich became a strategic product as it was exported, bringing in foreign currency for the country. The export market was more important for the Soviet Union than the domestic market. Foreign buyers were interested in Moskvich cars and they were exported to Belgium, the Netherlands, France, Finland, Great Britain, and Scandinavian countries. Moskvich were highly sought after in these countries and were even praised in Western publications. For instance, the English magazine Demotor described the Moskvich 408 as a practical, reliable, and comfortable vehicle after a test drive. For that price, you would be able to get a lot of cars and equipment. The British noted that the car was designed to a high standard, featuring smooth running, excellent steering, and a comfortable interior. However, there were also some criticisms, such as a noisy gearbox, small vibrations, heavy brakes, and weak dynamics. Despite these concerns, the cars still received positive reviews. In 1968, the Norwegian magazine World of Technology tested the Model 408 under the harshest conditions possible. As a result, they noted that the Moskvich performs better than we expected in harsh conditions. We can confidently say that few cars could withstand such testing. These praises were supported by Moskvich's strong sales in Europe. Then something amazing happened. The factory created a new engine resulting in the Moskvich 412, which was essentially the same as the Moskvich 408 but with a powerful 75 horsepower engine. Rumor has it that the engine in question was a replica of a MAU, but this is not the case. There were too many differences between the two engines. However, it should be noted that some technical solutions were still taken from the Bavarian engine at that time. The Moskvich 412 with this engine was at that time the most dynamic car in the Soviet Union, even ahead of the Volga and Pobeda models, which were higher in class. Soviet racers were very fond of these Moskvichs, and for a long time, they had no equal on racing tracks in the USSR. You can immerse yourself in this era by watching the 1972 movie Racers. These Moskvich cars, with a capacity of 75 horsepower, took part in the famous London-Sydney Transcontinental Marathon and finished fourth in the overall standings, ahead of many European sports cars. All Soviet cars successfully reached the finish line without serious technical problems along the way. The performance in the London, Mexico rally can be described as an excellent result. Moskvichs, which were almost standard models with minimal modifications, surpassed Mercedes, Peugeot, Citroën, and even Porsche in this rally. Many other cars were unable to reach the finish line, but the Moskvichs managed to overcome 26.0 kilometers, including on difficult off-road terrain, and reached the finish in third place for the team. This earned them great recognition in the world. After this success, car exports increased significantly, and demand for Moskvich cars both in the USSR and abroad was so high that production had to be expanded. The Moskvich 412 model began to be produced in large numbers in Izhevsk, as well as outside the USSR in Bulgaria and Belgium. The popularity of Moskvichs skyrocketed and factories could not keep up with demand. The late 1960s and early 1970s were a golden age for Moskvichs. Life was great, and tens of thousands of cars were being exported. The domestic market demand was many times greater than the supply. To meet the increased demand, Renault purchased new equipment to increase car production. Everything seemed to be going well, but this idyll could not last forever. Design bureaus were working hard to develop a new model, the Moskvich 35, a larger car that would occupy a niche between the Volga and Lada. When Vaz started producing Shiguli in 1970, it began to compete directly with Moskvich. Internal competition, according to Soviet leadership, was not allowed. The prototype of the new Moskvich was designed to be a more luxurious and powerful car with automatic transmission. A significant amount of time and resources were invested in its development, but it turned out to be outdated. The project was put on hold, and engineers started working on new prototypes. They were cars with a fastback body, independent suspension for all wheels, and a modern design. There were high hopes for them, but they didn't succeed either. In 1977, the company had a technical meeting where it was decided that the next generation of Soviet cars would be front-wheel drive. All work on the prototypes stopped, and the factory was left without a promising new model. It's worth noting that the company that brought the country's currency received almost no return on its investment. All the prototypes were rejected by management with the message there are no funds for a new model, we're upgrading old cars and keeping them in production. After years of experimenting and searching, the factory doesn't have a car left that can replace the outdated model. Such a short-sighted decision by management led to a significant lag in product manufacturability by the mid-1970s. Cars were outdated, and demand for them began to decrease abroad. As a result, the decision was made to modernize the 412 model and rename it the Moskvich 2140. The three Moskvich models, the 408, 412, and the upgraded 2140, were almost identical with minor design changes. In the Soviet Union, motorists were pleased to purchase a new Moskvich, but sales abroad plummeted. The factory needed a new model, but none was available. For 24 years, the outdated Moskvich 2140 continued to be produced on the assembly line. Abroad, this car was unclaimed, and at home it was heavily competed by the Lada. Prospects were bleak, and the factory gradually lost importance and prestige. In the 1980s, the plant was already in crisis, and the much-anticipated new Moskvich 2141 model was born through agony, with the help of some foreign ideas. There was high hope for this car, as it was seen as a way to save the factory from impending disaster. The development, design, and borrowing of foreign ideas led to serious difficulties, which had serious consequences.